This episode of Stand Up and Holler is brought to you by Thrive Fantasy. Come prop up on Thrive Fantasy this football season. Thrive Fantasy is a daily fantasy sports and esports app for player props. With Thrive, you can eliminate the countless hours of research and focus on only the top tier athletes that have the biggest impact on the game. Choose 10 out of the 20 available player props to build your lineup. Each prop is assigned a fantasy value for both the over and the under based on how likely it is to hit. Hit the most props and rack up the most points to win a share of the prize pool. Use promo code REACT when you sign up today, and you'll receive a 100% instant first deposit match up to $100. Download Thrive Fantasy on the App Store or Play Store or by visiting their website, www.thrivefantasy.com. Sign up and prop today.
I'm Nick Nugent, joined by Will Miles. Welcome to Stand Up and Holler. On today's episode, Billy Ball comes to Gainesville. The Gators hire Billy Napier. We'll talk about that in 2 bits, 4 bits. What are the first things we'd like to see Billy Napier do with this program? In 6 bits, we'll discuss our expectations for the Napier era in Gainesville. And to wrap it up with $1, we will take a quick look at the Gators' big win over Florida State on Saturday in the Swamp. Will, back in Philly, man. How was Thanksgiving?
I mean, it was great, except for we had to drag 4 kids, one of whom's 9 months old, on 2 different planes getting down there and getting back. But the palm trees are nice, and it wasn't all that hot in Florida this week, but we flew back to Philly today and got off the plane, and it was 37 degrees and windy. So at this point, it was a balmy 72 pretty much the whole time we were down there in South Florida. It was fun, right? It's always good to see family. Always good. We were able to get up. You and I actually met each other for the first time live, not over the internet.
Right.
To talk to. Went and gave a talk up at the Gainesville Quarterback Club up there in Gainesville on Tuesday. Great reception there. So all the news with Napier coming out, and certainly all the news now that's been coming out with these other coaches. So a lot going on during Thanksgiving, but very thankful that we were able to get down there and spend time with people we care about and meet new friends as well.
Yeah, fun little road trip up from the Tampa area up to Gainesville. Got to meet a ton of great people at the Gainesville Quarterback Club. How we were very much welcomed there, and it was a great time. Had a great time, man. But let's jump into 2 bits. Billy Napier hired at Florida. Scott Strickland goes out and gets his first and apparently only choice. So Napier comes to Gainesville, taking over for Dan Mullen after 4 successful seasons as the head coach of Louisiana Lafayette. Before his arrival, the Raging Cajuns had not won more than 9 games in a single season. They're sitting at 11-1 right now, Will. Napier has led ULL to their 3rd consecutive season with 10 wins or more and is about to play for the league title for the 3rd straight year. Louisiana has won the Sun Belt West in each of Napier's 4 seasons. Last year, they were awarded the co-title because they didn't play the championship game with Coastal Carolina due to COVID, but they played very tight in the regular season when they did play. I think it was a field goal difference in that game. As an assistant, Napier led a middle-of-the-road offense in the Pac-12 during a single season as Arizona State's offensive coordinator. These are some of the highlights from his time as an assistant. Saban at Bama, Dabo at Clemson are well documented. Those times he has admitted that arrogance played a little bit in a role in his downfall at Clemson. He was a young offensive coordinator. I think he got that job when he was around 30 years old. After he was let go from Clemson, he was one of the early coaches to go through that, to take that analyst role in Tuscaloosa under Saban. But he became a poster boy for the wonders within the walls of the Saban Rehab Clinic for fired football coaches. Billy Napier is definitely one of the guys that has been held out as a shining example in that. Some notable red flags for me, Will, on Napier's resume. 2012, we talked about it before, served under McElwain at Colorado State, quarterback coach, assistant head coach. 2013, for a month, he was the tight ends coach and recruiting coordinator at Florida State before Saban came calling and offered him the head to become the wide receivers coach at Alabama. Playing days, he played at Furman. FCS, led them to the FCS championship game in 2001, played quarterback. They lost to Montana. And Will, I really like this quote on him. Just a little more background on Napier here. A ULL staffer who spent time at Alabama was asked the difference between Billy Napier and Nick Saban. And after thinking for a moment, he said, one guy coaches offense and the other guy coaches defense. That's it. On behalf of Alabama fans, I'll also add one guy has 7 titles and the other guy doesn't. Roll Tide. But other than that, that's your Billy Napier intro for you, Will.
Yeah, I mean, I think everybody's really excited. I think Napier has all the things that you would look for in a guy, in an up-and-coming guy. He's young. He looks like he's hungry on the recruiting trail. Certainly has the early expectations at Clemson. People identified something in him early on where they said, this guy's going to be good. And then obviously had some issues there at Clemson, though one of the things he did while he was at Clemson was recruit Taj Boyd while he was there. And the offenses at Clemson, even with Kyle Parker at quarterback, weren't terrible, right? I mean, they weren't – it doesn't sound like it was a performance-based thing that forced him out there, but more of a conflict of personalities between him and Dabo. Look, I mean, when you look at his overall performance, I mean, the Louisiana Raging Cajuns, 102nd in his first year in the ESPN FPI, 44th, 36th, and 48th the last 3 years. So a top 50 program in the country, and that's significantly better than what he's recruited at. We're going to talk about recruiting, I'm sure, in a second, but that's better than what he's recruited at. He's always been in the running for the West and the Sun Belt. He's won the West all 4 times, all 3 times it's been available. In, I think, 2020, because of COVID, they didn't actually have a championship game, but still wound up winning the conference. He's lost in the championship game twice, won once. He's got one coming up this week. And interestingly, that was a non-negotiable thing with him. At least that's what he said, that it was non-negotiable, that he wouldn't miss that game with Louisiana, which says something about him, says something about his dedication to the players, and just sort of the whole transition. Scott Strickland contacted the athletic director at Louisiana. Louisiana's been they've been very pro Napier as he's left. And that's certainly a stark contrast to what we've seen in Oklahoma. And certainly I'm sure what we're going to hear out of South Bend as the news of Brian Kelly is breaking like 30 minutes before we came on tonight. So it's interesting to me that everyone in Louisiana seems to love him, knows that he was going to go someplace to a bigger and better job, and is happy that he's going to a job in Gainesville. And really, even like the Raging podcast that's been interacting with Dave Waters over Gators Breakdown, they're happy he's not going to LSU, which is an interesting sort of dynamic there in Louisiana.
I was going to say, everyone in Louisiana loves him except some folks in Baton Rouge, apparently.
Well, I think this is one of those he said, she said. I think Napier expressed interest there. I think that they probably said, we'd like to see our options. And then Napier looked a little bit closer and said, well, I want someone who wants me. And, my guess is that there's a little bit of people on both sides that kind of dipping a toe in the water, and neither one of them really liking the way it felt. And so they decided to go in a different direction. I think Brian Kelly's going to be good at LSU. So I don't think that's necessarily a bad hire. I think there are some advantages to having a guy like Napier. There's some disadvantages to having a guy like Napier in terms of being able to project what you're going to get. And that's kind of what makes it fun, right? Is that we're going to get to evaluate Napier in his first big job, as opposed to comparing what he did at a previous big job or something like that. And, at the quarterback club, one of the things I talked about was that first-time head coaches have actually won about as many national championships as guys who have been hired from someplace else. And that the thing to look for in guys who started at non-Power 5 schools or non-traditional power schools and then get up is not necessarily winning percentage. It's, do they know how to build a program? Are they able to turn a program around? Do they make a difference in recruiting? When you look at guys like Mac Brown at North Carolina going to Texas, Les Miles, Oklahoma State to LSU, though that the LSU program was pretty much built before he got there. And then Nick Saban going from Michigan State to LSU. Those are the 3 guys that I identified as being at what you would consider, Power 5 schools, but lower level Power 5 schools, and then getting promoted. Napier isn't coming from a Power 5 school, but I think he sort of fits that profile from the standpoint of he's clearly been identified as somebody who knows how to build a program. Florida clearly has identified that as one of the weaknesses that they've had under Jim McElwain and Dan Mullen. And so now they're bringing in Napier, giving him a shot. I'm excited to see what happens. And certainly the interesting thing is I think we'll know pretty quickly. We'll talk about that in, I think, 6 bits about expectations. And so I'm excited, but at the same time, I think anytime you make a coaching change, there's risk. And so, the risk was outweighed by the reward, certainly, as things fell apart for Dan Mullen this year. And we'll see how things progress with Napier now in charge.
This is not a one-hit wonder coming to Gainesville. This is not like you might have if Jamie Chadwell, they had another good season this year, but last year Jamie Chadwell was a hot name after being a one-hit wonder. He's backed it up. Napier's backed it up several times, right? This is a guy that, though he is tied to Saban, though he is tied to Dabo, and really more people tie more to Saban because he grew a little more. It sounded like under Saban. This was a guy who took his time. He was very selective. 40 years building a program, and we see some consistency under a program he's built. Guys he's recruited coming in, being developed. We've seen the whole process develop out with Billy Napier, whereas, you look at McElwain is the comparison in some respects, being a Saban assistant. Oh, here's another Saban assistant. I think this is a completely different situation than when we did bring McElwain in here. But some of the things you hear about Napier, the attention to detail, the guy is the type of guy who plans things out. Like I used that comparison, the staffer comparing him to Saban, very meticulous, almost the borderline opposite of what we saw from Dan Mullen in some areas. And it seems like Mullen's shortcomings on, say, the recruiting trail was a big thing we talked about. That played a factor in his departure, right? So those lack of attention to detail in certain areas definitely played a role in his departure. Napier looks like a guy that could come in and fix a lot of those problems. And based on his resume, you can back it up with all types of facts here. Like, I mean, even his recruiting rankings in the Sun Belt here at Louisiana Lafayette, his first year he comes in, his first class was ranked 5th. That's always tough, first class for a coach. But then 2019, 2020, 2021, first in the conference, Sun Belt, first in the conference. And this is Sun Belt's got some good football, folks. Appalachian State has been a power in there. For example, like a Coastal Carolina, great season last year. 2022 here, currently ranked 2nd behind Coastal Carolina in the rankings. But, there's lots of chatter about him going other places. As an assistant, Will, you mentioned Taj Boyd at Clemson, at Bama, primary recruiter on Cam Robinson, the tackle. Trayvon Diggs having a great year for the Dallas Cowboys at corner, and 2 5-star receivers out of South Florida, Calvin Ridley, Jerry Jeudy. So we've not only seen him recruit big-time guys at big-time places, but we've seen him develop smaller programs and build up smaller programs. Louisiana's had some good draft picks coming out of there the last couple of years. Go look it up in the NFL there. They've had some solid on the offensive line and some running backs. They've had some real good players get developed out of UL Lafayette. So very excited to see what he can do when handed the keys to the Florida Gators football program, Will.
Yeah, I think the Saban assistant knock is something that I think is fair to question, but also something that I think you need to dig deeper into the numbers when you look at guys coming from previous programs. That's one of the things I did in an article that I wrote right before Napier was hired, actually. But if you looked at McElwain, he took over for Steve Fairchild there at
Colorado State.
Colorado State in the Mountain West. And so the recruiting ranking for Fairchild in the conference was 3.8. The recruiting ranking on average for McElwain was 7.7. So when you look at his recruiting issues that he had at Florida, I don't know that should be a surprise. His national recruiting ranking and his conference recruiting ranking went down. Now, the average FPI finish for McElwain went up. So he was able to get more out of the guys that he brought in than Fairchild was. But Fairchild got fired because he wasn't getting the job done on the field. From a recruiting standpoint, he was better than McElwain. You look at Dan Mullen coming in, he actually did improve Mississippi State's overall recruiting profile nationally. But in the SEC, his average recruiting ranking under Kroom at Mississippi State was 9.0. Under Mullen was 9.6. So again, you look at what he did in conference, which is where it really matters, because you can, if you go and look at the data by conference, what ends up happening is that you can see that in the SEC specifically, basically, if you're not 6th or 7th nationally, you're 4th in the conference, 5th in the conference, 6th in the conference, and that really has an impact. So then you mentioned going to Napier, 5th that first year, but then first, and recruiting 2nd this year before he's decided to leave. So he's 2nd, 2.0 is his average overall in the Sun Belt, but 3 straight number 1 classes, and that's not coincidentally. He's finished basically 1.5. So 2 seconds and 2 firsts, assuming that he wins on Saturday for Louisiana in that conference. So you got a guy who's winning when he has the opportunity to win, but also is recruiting without. So that class in 2019 that he brought in, the number 1 class, he hadn't shown anything on the field yet. Right. He basically cast a vision, and from that vision was able to bring in a better class. And yeah, they won on the field that year, but that winning was just sort of maybe a momentum that kind of pushed things over the edge from a recruiting standpoint. I guarantee you that the nuts and bolts of that class were in place well before Napier ever coached a game in Louisiana.
What stock do you put in the fact that he's had opportunities the last couple of off seasons, and you've heard serious talks with South Carolina, Auburn, Mississippi State, rumors with Virginia Tech this offseason. He seems to be a guy who knows what he's looking for. You mentioned the maybe reaching out to LSU. Even he seems to be a guy who knows exactly what he's looking for. What do you think he saw in Florida that he ended up getting paired up with the Gators here?
So, I mean, I think you saw a couple of things. One is that Florida has less involved boosters, I would say, than some other programs out there. I mean, if you think about Auburn, was it Tuberville that they were interviewing his replacement while he was still coaching a game or something on the tarmac?
Didn't Petrino fly in the dead of night?
So when you've got that going on with your boosters, sort of, stabbing you in the back as a coach from the start, that starts to have an impact. I think the big thing that it indicates to me is that he has enough confidence in himself at this point that he's willing to think about process and he's willing to think about the best situation for him. And even, we've known this was pretty much done for about 2 weeks, but the discussion points and the hang up points were all things I'm pretty sure about, analysts, about recruiting budgets, about making sure he had the right resources for the assistants that he was going to bring in, which is sort of a double-edged sword, which we'll talk about in the expectations section. But really what it indicates to me is that he looked at Florida, said, this is the top job in the country. And I think most people agree that it's the top job in the country and you have the opportunity to win big. And with Oklahoma and Texas coming to the SEC, it's going to be the premier conference in the country. That's where you want to be. And so if you're looking at, the Georgia job isn't coming up anytime soon. The Alabama job, I don't think is coming open anytime soon. Saban's going to do this till he's 90. So, if you sit there and go, all right, the big boys don't have anything that's coming open. I've got this skill set to build things. Where in the SEC would my skill set be best applied? I think there's no doubt that it's Florida, because the one thing that Florida has been missing, I mean, I think it was Jaheim Singletary is the cornerback Singletary who flipped from Florida. Somebody flipped from Florida to Georgia relatively recently, and
Humphrey.
Yeah, it might have been Jalen Humphrey. So, but basically put out a tweet that basically said that, or I think there was an article over at one of the Georgia sites that said that, Florida was calling him like once a week and Georgia was calling him daily. That stuff isn't going to happen if you've got the right recruiting staff and you've got, you won't lose out on a recruit because you forgot to call him. You'll lose on a recruit maybe because Georgia does a better job or because there are nefarious things going on underneath that you don't necessarily know about, all the different things we hear about and those sorts of things. You're going to lose some battles to Georgia. You're going to lose some battles to Alabama, but you can't lose all of them. And that was what was happening to Florida, is they were losing all of them when it came to the big time guys who were there. And that's the expectation, right? The expectation is that we won't lose those anymore. And I think part of the reason we have that expectation is because Napier has selected Florida. He's negotiated what he needs or what he thinks he needs from Florida. And now it's his job to go get it done.
I think this has been a fairly popular hire to this point from what I've seen. A lot of fan reaction. People seem to be very excited about this, especially in light of the suffering that has gone on within Gator Nation over the last couple of months. What do you say to a couple fans out there that might be looking around and going, well, USC just got Lincoln Riley, and now LSU, we're hearing Brian Kelly, these big names that we know very well. We're getting the guy, we're giving him his first opportunity in the SEC, but what advantages and disadvantages do you think that comes with Billy Napier?
Well, first off, I'd tell him to show me the championship rings, the real championship rings from Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly, right? Those guys have had easier paths, and they keep getting whipped by the SEC when they end up getting into the playoffs. And so I think Lincoln Riley is a very good coach. I think Brian Kelly is a very good coach, but they have playoff appearance rings. They don't have championship rings. And one of the reasons that they have playoff appearance rings is that they don't have to play in the SEC. So that's the first thing that I would say. The second thing I would say is show me the history of guys who have been a big time coach someplace else, have gone directly to another job, big time someplace else, and have succeeded. And there isn't really much of a history there. Now, granted, the money hasn't been that big. It's not like Bobby Bowden was leaving Florida State 25 years ago to go someplace else. At the same time, there's not a history of that working all that well either. And the expectations at those places are going to be huge right off the bat. The closest maybe I can think of is Jimbo Fisher. And Jimbo Fisher is sort of, kind of Dan Mullinish there at Texas A&M, except for the recruiting is a little bit better, but the on-field results haven't been all that great at A&M. They've paid an awful lot of money to basically get Kevin Sumlin again. They're at A&M ever since he transferred over from Florida State. Hey, he had a bunch of success at Florida State. Lo and behold, that's the ACC. Maybe it was an easier track to the championship there, and he happened to hit on a quarterback. So,
are you saying that A&M fans are not going to have fun talking about that Alabama win at the Gator Bowl this year?
I mean, I'm saying that you got to beat Ole Miss if you beat Alabama, because otherwise it doesn't make a difference. But look, what I would tell fans is that Napier's a 5-star recruit. You look at all the stuff in his background and you go, look, this guy has a ton of potential, and everything that we're looking at says that he has all the potential in order to be elite. The problem is that we've seen before at Florida, Andre DeBose and Ronald Powell come out as 5-star recruits, and they're disappointing. And that doesn't mean they're not good players, but it means they're disappointing for what their rating suggested they would be coming in. Justin Shorter is another good example recently. So just being a 5-star recruit doesn't guarantee anything, but he could be Tim Tebow. He could be Percy Harvin, right? He could be that level of a change maker at the coaching position. And Dan Mullen was never going to be that. Dan Mullen was a 3-star recruit who was going to develop, and he was going to, get the most out of his players for the most part. Though this year that you might be able to debate that a little bit, but that was always the profile of Mullen, right? Is that he was an excellent X's and O's guy, and he was going to have the right people around him in order to get to the level Florida needed to get to. And essentially Florida was going to be the Auburn of the East, that we were going to be behind Georgia. And every once in a while you jump up and get them. I'm actually really enjoying the Michigan slander, or the Michigan sort of jubilee this week after beating Ohio State. Oh. Not because you're an Ohio State fan, though that does sort of help a little bit. But the thing I'm enjoying about it is that this reminds me of Georgia last year. Right. This reminds me of Florida beating Georgia last year, and all the Florida fans going, see, we could beat Georgia. And then you get whipped this year and go, oh, 1-3. That's not so great. And that's kind of where Harbaugh is going to be. Right. And if you want Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, that's fine. But that's what you're going for. And if you wanted Dan Mullen at Florida, that's fine. But that's kind of what you were going for, is everything was going to have to come together in order to do it. Now, Harbaugh has his team at 10-1. And if they win the Big Ten championship, he's going to make the playoff. And the problem with Florida is they had Todd Grantham as a defensive coordinator, so they didn't make the playoff last year. But all that being said, I go back to what I said about Napier. I think he's a 5-star recruit. I think you look at his profile and you go, this guy has a lot of potential, but potential is just potential. And so, at the end of the day, we don't know. There's a risk inherently every time you hire a new guy. And, you go back and look at that 2018 class or 2018 changeover in coaches. There were 20 guys who changed positions. 8 of them have been fired. 1 went from UCF to Tennessee, and Josh Heupel. And then you got Chip Kelly and Scott Frost, who haven't been fired yet, but probably should have, and certainly would have been fired if they'd have been hired on at Florida. And, and the overall winning percentage for the guys who came in 2018 is worse than the guys that they replaced. And so it's not a zero risk proposition, but I think it's a risk worth taking. Just like if you had if you're sitting there going, I got a guy who I know is going to be a solid left tackle. He's not going to make it to the pros. He's not going to be a difference maker, but he'll be a solid left tackle. And then you go, hey, I got a guy who could be an elite left tackle, but there's always the risk that he gets injured or something like that. And hey, I'm going to have to spend a lot of energy recruiting him. You got to get that elite left tackle, and it makes a big difference. And I think that's sort of where it comes in with Napier's. I think you give him the shot, and he's going to have to show some stuff early on, but he has the ability to be one of those 5-star recruits, be that next guy in the SEC. And it's interesting. I wonder, I'll have to go back and look at what Georgia fans said about Kirby Smart when he came in from Georgia or from Alabama, because there were a lot of question marks there too, right? You're replacing Rick. Rick has been here for a long time. He's steady. We've got this floor, all we need is the right X or Y to sort of get over the edge. And Georgia said, you know what, we've had this long enough. We're going to make the change. We're going to bring in somebody. Maybe it's worse, but maybe it's better. And maybe it's better is worthwhile trying it. And that's kind of where I think Florida is with Billy Napier.
Yeah, when I look at Napier, the one thing you look at Lincoln Riley going out to USC, for example, and I'll bring up your Michigan game again, Will, but Jim Harbaugh afterward made a crack about Ryan Day, saying something along the lines of Ryan Day was basically born on third base and thinking he accomplished something, right? Which is an interesting quote for a son of a key Bo Schembechler assistant who grew up going to Michigan practices and then later was identified as the Michigan quarterback to say. But Ryan Day ends up, he takes that shot at Ryan Day. And to some extent, Urban Meyer did lay the foundation for Ryan Day to come in. I think Ryan Day's done a spectacular job. But if you want to put a knock on Ryan Day, that is one thing you could say is we haven't seen Ryan Day build from scratch, take something over, build it up. And not that Urban Meyer built Ohio State from scratch, but he certainly took them to a different level, right? Lincoln Riley inherited a pretty good situation from Bob Stoops at Oklahoma. Oklahoma, one of the premier blue bloods in college football. Just solid program. Never had to, he wasn't where he was with USC, where now we get to see for the first time, can Lincoln Riley build that up? His track record says probably, based on the way he recruits well, he brings in elite talent, he knows how to develop the quarterback at an elite level. But even some Oklahoma fans are putting out there a tweet. I saw that RJ Young, the #1 ranked sports show, the Fox Sports guy, he put a tweet out there, he's a big Oklahoma guy, saying something along the lines of Lincoln Riley's never developed the quarterback that he recruited from start to finish, basically. So there is that shot with Lincoln Riley, even though he's that high profile name. He's been in the playoffs a bunch. They've certainly played great with those transfer quarterbacks at Oklahoma, but we haven't seen him build that from scratch. That is something interesting with a Billy Napier coming into Florida, is we actually got to see him take a program that was coming off of NCAA sanctions, had 3 consecutive losing seasons, and not only build it back up, but build it to levels it has yet to touch in its history. So I think that you're getting a guy who's 42 years old coming in, and like you say, he's that 5-star recruit. Nothing's guaranteed. You've been saying that all the last couple of weeks, right? And we'll talk about that more in the expectation section here, but just something to think about it for those of you who are sitting out there getting a little salty about Lincoln Riley and Brian Kelly. And hey, some of you might be disappointed that Bob Stoops is at Oklahoma too. So that was a pretty popular name for a minute there. But I think this Billy Napier hire really fired up to see how it develops. Let's jump into 4-bits, Will, and we'll start off. I want to hear what the first thing Billy Napier should do when he inherits this program starting next week.
I think he needs to cast a vision. I think he needs to cast a vision with the fan base. He needs to basically set actual metrics that we can start measuring him on in terms of, is he performing or is he not? And that's an uncomfortable thing to do, right? But we just came off the Dan Mullen era where he talks about the Gator standard and he talks about relentless effort. Those were the 2 things that he said when he came in. And the problem is those are not definable quantities, right? And so what I want to hear him say is, we're going to recruit just like the big boys in the SEC. Right? He doesn't have to say top 2, top 3 classes, but that's what you're saying when you say we're going to recruit with the big boys of the SEC, that we're going to play, that we are going to get to a place where we have the ability to beat and compete with these big boys in the SEC on a year-to-year basis. And we're in this for the long haul, that this is a 5 or 6 year process to get to that place, but we expect to win a lot along the way as we're going there. And then, that's it, right? If you cast a vision, people will buy into the vision. The problem is that relentless effort moniker worked against Mullen when he then tweeted out pictures of him wakeboarding or video of him wakeboarding when Kirby Smart was out there recruiting, right? Like you can have work-life balance if you want. In fact, I think that's probably a healthier way to live. However, you can't then come out and say Gator standard and relentless effort and do that. So that to me is the big thing. And really the first thing for him to do is that there's a connection that if you make with the fans will support you the entire way. And one of the things that I think was a real disconnect for Dan Mullen was he alienated key constituencies within the fan base continuously over the course of his career. They really played up that first spring game. This is where the first time I sort of went, like he played up that first spring game. Then it was not a serious endeavor. Now, if you'd have just said, hey, we're going to have a lot of fun, that's what it's going to be, no big deal. Right. But you say, hey, come out, support us, fill the swamp. This needs to be something that, we're building towards something, and then you don't take it seriously. Well, then people look at it and go, okay, well, that's an issue. He talked about fans coming out to support the team before they started winning. And 1, that's not the way economics works. But 2, Florida fans have been coming to the swamp. And I wrote a big article about it. The Florida fans have been coming irrespective. And Florida had been raising ticket prices continuously year over year over year. And the idea that you've been raising ticket prices and increasing revenue and the Florida fans are still showing up means that that's kind of a swipe to fans when you say show up before we actually win. Then you have the instigating of the pack the swamp stuff during COVID. You've got the Darth Vader instigating the brawl against Missouri. You've got the no show against Oklahoma. You've got the show cause for the recruiting out west, and all of those things start to add up to where less and less people are buying into your vision. And by the time that South Carolina thud came around, no one was buying into the vision, not even the players. And that, I think, is the legacy of that sort of experience with Florida. Is you can say relentless effort, but it's just words. And the idea is you have to cast the vision continuously. You have to progressively allow fans to buy in. So the second thing he needs to do is spring practice needs to be open and fall practice needs to be open. And if Georgia gets some advantage because they pick up something we're doing schematically, fine. But you're sacrificing that in order to make sure you've got people bought into the program and making sure that the fans feel like you're in it with them. And you do those two things, and I think you're going to have people behind you the entire way, because you have, like I said, you are a 5-star recruit. We want to see you succeed. And so no one's looking to take shots, but you're going to have to perform up to those expectations. And so, setting the vision so that even when you do fall short, we go, it's okay to fall short here because the larger vision is X. And that was always the problem with Mullen, is when you lost to Kentucky or when you lost to Missouri or when you didn't have Anthony Richardson in there, when you should have, especially later in the season, we all looked at it and said, what are we doing here? Like, there's no vision for what's going to come in 2022 or 2023 that I can buy into. And if you're not going to give me that vision, then I'm certainly not going to give you 2022 or 2023 to prove to me that I'm wrong. I'm going to start, calling Strickland and calling Fuchs. And that's what the boosters did. So that to me is the first thing. The first thing to do is cast vision, make sure the fans are brought in. And if the fans are brought in, then I think that, and the vision is solid, then I think the players will buy in and things sort of get off to a good start from there.
Yeah. So what you're saying is that if Billy Napier's good at wakeboarding, you don't want to know about it.
Yeah. So reading the room would be, I think when we were at the Gator Club the other day, the quarterback club the other day, that was really sort of the thing that kept coming up over and over and over again, was not that Dan Mullen's a bad guy. He's not. And was not that he's a bad coach, because he's a good coach. It's that he didn't seem to be able to read the room for what the Florida fans were looking for. And what they were looking for was either a guy who was going to troll the crap out of Georgia and Alabama and beat them, or a guy who was going to be silent until he beat them. So those are the two things, right? If you're going to go out and get whipped, be quiet and work harder. If you're going to go out and win, you can crow all you want. And Mullen seemed to have those two things backwards. And to be honest, I think he told us that early on. I mean, when he said, come out to the swamp and then we'll win. It's like, no, it's not the way it works. Win. Well, one, we support you regardless. But two, the way things really work is when you win, that's when all the bandwagon fans come along, and you're not going to convince people just to show up. And really they should show up because of your vision for the program, not because, you think it's going to impact the result. We should look at the vision and go, I'm bought in. I'm buying tickets today, because if I don't get them today and he builds this program into something major, I won't be able to get them 5 years from now. And, that's an easy thing to sell. And that's not something that Dan Mullen seemed to be able to. Reading the room was a major theme the other day.
Strong theme. I took this question a lot more literally. What's the first thing I want to see Billy Napier do? Become great friends with number 15. Call Anthony Richardson, text Anthony Richardson, email Anthony Richardson, follow Anthony Richardson on social, buy some AR-15 merch. You become his best friend. We're seeing it. Watch this Lincoln Riley move to USC from Oklahoma. Free agency in college football does not just apply to coaches anymore. Look what's happening right now. You're seeing Spencer Rattler. He's probably out anyway, whether or not that probably is not Riley related, but a bunch of OU recruits have already decommitted, already projected to sign with USC. This is having a monumental shift in the landscape here. OU freshman quarterback sensation Caleb Williams already rumored to follow Riley. These are all rumors, right? Rumored to follow Riley out to the West Coast. There was a picture going around from Clemson today. Brent Venables, defensive coordinator, former Oklahoma defensive coordinator, now the defensive coordinator at Clemson for a lot of years, rumored as a serious candidate for the job at OU. bunch of Clemson players, including DJ Uiagalelei, in the car with his son, giving a horns down gesture. So not only is the Oklahoma quarterback already on the way to USC, but Clemson's quarterback is now on the way to Oklahoma. It's insane right now. It's insane. Just absolute craziness out there in college football. You see, even within state, you don't even have to leave the state. Dylan Gabriel, solid quarterback out of UCF, announces he's transferring 2 top running backs in college football here. Jamar Gibbs, TCU, Zach Evans, they're already hitting the portal. So the portal giveth, the portal taketh, Will. I think Napier needs to lock down Richardson and other key players before focusing externally on new recruits, because that's what we're excited about. But he really needs to lock down some of the key guys on this roster to make sure no potential key contributors for 2022 get out the door.
Hey, I'm on board, man. The scared buddy don't make money stuff is exciting. And I think that sort of reflects back to, AR-15 used to be what, AR-2? And then decided he wanted to be AR-15, and to put 15 on your back at Florida comes with some expectations, and you got to have some balls to do that. And so you got Napier coming in saying scared money don't make money. You got AR-15 there. And certainly I'm excited to see what both of those guys can do. And I think Florida's team is better than they showed this year. And I think with Anthony Richardson at the helm, they could be really good next year. Now, are they going to be an 11-winner national championship level team? Probably not. There's still some holes, especially defensive tackle and offensive line. There are some places that need to be filled, and the problem you're going to run into is in the SEC. Those are the 2 places you don't want to have to fill when you're doing that. But the transfer portal maybe does give you an opportunity to do that. But when I talk about casting a vision, yeah, that's for the fans, but that's for the players too, right? And if you come in there and you cast a vision in terms of you guys are going to be the ones who, when everybody looks at that 2005 and 2006 team under Urban Meyer, we look at that and say, yeah, Ron Zook brought in all those players, but Urban Meyer and those guys are the guys who turned the program around from what the Ron Zook era was. And now we've even been out in the wilderness longer than we were with Ron Zook, right? That was just 3 years and it felt forever. But now we've been out in the wilderness for a decade, right? Or 11 years. And he's going to come in, he's going to be like, look, 30 years from now, people are going to look back at this 2022 team as the one that set the path for Florida to be the most dominant program in the SEC. You guys are going to be part of that. And you transfer to Alabama, you transfer to Ohio State, you transfer to, wherever else, you're not going to get to be a part of that. So do not leave because you want to be a part of that. Look at what happened to Tim Tebow. Look at how he's revered here. Look at Brandon Spikes. Look at how he's revered here. Look at Chris Leak and look at how he's revered here. I think, to me, the vision that you're selling to the fans is we are going to turn this around long term, which means the vision you're selling to the players is you're going to be a part of the first team that turns this around long term. And everybody says the Spurrier, the Napier, and then the Urban Meyer regimes, right? Right now it's the Spurrier regime and the Urban Meyer regime. I think, you can sell it as we're going to make it Spurrier, Napier, Meyer, then Napier, Spurrier, Meyer. Like, let's, so.
Whoa, boy.
I mean, look, I'm not saying he's going to be able to do it. I'm saying that's the vision you cast. You haven't lost a game yet. You're not going to lose a game for 9 months minimum. So cast that vision. And if you go out there and beat Utah, with Anthony Richardson throwing dimes all over the place, and Richardson and all these guys who have an extra year of eligibility buy in. Like maybe Ventrell Miller comes back because he'd like to take that medical red shirt and he comes back and plays. Maybe Kyer Elam comes back because he doesn't think his NFL grade. I don't think he's going to be first round now. And so maybe he thinks he can make himself more money if he comes back. Brenton Cox, maybe he comes back because, he had a huge game against Florida State, but NFL scouts are going to look at the inconsistency and say, this guy isn't a first round pick. There's some guys who can make some money by coming back. And if you can cast the vision of you guys will be the guys who had the opportunity to leave, but didn't. And because you didn't leave, you helped make Florida great. I think that's a really compelling vision and something that not only the fans would buy into, but the players as well.
It's a great segue into 6 bits here, Will, when we talk about the expectations for this team heading into 2022 with Billy Napier. Will, you're working on an article for this right now.
Yeah, so this is less about casting the vision, though. I think that's critical, and more about. So Neil Blackman wrote an article over at Saturday Down South. I thought it was a good article, but it basically kind of implored Florida fans for patience, and I don't agree with that. I don't think Florida fans should be patient at all because I don't think that the history of the SEC allows you to be patient. So Bill Sykes did something back in 2018 for Read and Reaction. He looked at SEC championship coaches since 2005. They had an average national recruiting ranking of 4.7 in their bump class. So the bump class is the second recruiting class. So you have a transition class. Right now, Napier's just trying to sort of patch together a transition class, right? The early signing day is coming up on the 15th of December. So he's got almost no time for that. Hopefully he can piece things together and maybe end up with a top 10 class.
Napier's bump class will be 2023 for those of you out there following.
But you will know in August of 2022 where that class pretty much stands. And so before he's ever gone out on the field, you'll kind of know. And then obviously he'll finalize it in December and February of that year after the season. But basically, those bump classes have had an average national ranking of 4.7 for the SEC champion since 2005. They've had an average conference ranking of 2.3. They've averaged 2.3 five-star recruits. Dan Mullen signed 2 5-star recruits the entire time he was at Florida over 4 years. They've averaged 2.3 5-star recruits in those bump classes. I don't think it's a coincidence. In fact, neither Mullen nor McElwain signed a 5-star in their bump classes. So I don't think it's a coincidence that those guys weren't able to achieve what Florida fans expect. And so if you're putting in a process that's going to help you compete with the big boys, the bump class is a clear demarcation line where you look at it and say, if you don't get the job done there, I'm going to start to get impatient because history says that you should be impatient. The other thing is that dating back to 1990, again, this is from Bill's research, only 2 coaches, and now it's 3 because Ed Orgeron, but they've won their first SEC championship at a school after their 3rd season. So Orgeron won in his 3rd full season. His first season was an interim there at LSU. But Phil Fulmer in Tennessee in 1997 had Peyton Manning at quarterback, Tommy Tuberville at Auburn in 2004. And then you've got Ed Orgeron now in 2019. So what that means is over the last 22 years, you've had 14 different coaches win SEC championships, and you've had 3 guys who've bucked that trend in the 22 years of winning in their first 3 years. So again, I go back and I look at it, and you look at guys like Tim Tebow and Percy Harvin came in Urban Meyer's bump class, certainly helped them win the title in year 2. You have a special transfer in Joe Burrow who comes over and helps Orgeron win. You've got Nick Saban, who's just been a monster, but even when he came to Alabama, right, that 2009 team, I think was his 3rd year there at Alabama.
Yeah,
they came in and won the SEC championship.
Mm-hmm.
So even a guy like Saban, I mean, you got to give him 2 or 3 years. I'm not saying you kick out.
He went undefeated in year 2. That 12-0 team with John Parker Wilson, I believe, was the quarterback, lost to Florida and Atlanta.
And holy moly, Anthony Richardson is better than John Parker Wilson. So as long as you can keep him healthy. But again, I'm not saying that next year he has to win a national championship. I'm saying that there are metrics along the way that you need to look for, because what we are hearing is Napier is a program builder. What we're hearing from Scott Strickland is, I want someone who's here for the long haul, who's going to build this team to be competitive for the long haul. Those are the 2 things. You have to win an SEC championship in your first 3 years. You have to have a bump class that's top 5. And top 2 in the conference, basically. And you have to have a couple of 5-stars in that class. If you don't, then you're missing metrics that have been critical for a ton of coaches to win SEC championships, while Jim McElwain has missed those, and even Will Muschamp has missed those. Muschamp hit a lot of them. He didn't hit all of them. But you look at Muschamp, McElwain, and Mullen, they missed those metrics. And lo and behold, Florida has had a good year from time to time, has been the 2nd best team in the East, but has not been able to put together sustained success that Gator fans want. So I think fans should be patient with Napier from the standpoint of, if he's casting a vision and can hit these benchmarks along the way, the on-field results will eventually come. This is actually the argument that I think you'd make for Kirby Smart, right? I mean, in his second or third year, he ends up in the national championship game, loses to Alabama, loses the SEC championship game at Alabama the next year, sort of took a step back in 2020. Florida's able to beat them, and now in 2021 look like they're just unbeatable. But he did win an SEC championship in his 2nd or 3rd year there at Georgia. There are marks along the way. You're going to have to hit those, and those are the things I think we need to look for as far as expectations for Napier.
Well, let's talk about immediate expectations in 2022. We talk about the hope around Anthony Richardson. Obviously, the recruiting class is not going to be super strong this year, but that might not be a killer for this year's team. Well, I know a lot of attention is going to be paid to this Utah game in the offseason. I know it, because it's an interesting matchup. We don't play Pac-12 schools that much. Utah is having a good year right this second. So I think a lot of attention is going to be paid to that. I would argue it's the 3rd most important game in our opening 6 games. We got Kentucky at Tennessee and versus Missouri sandwiched. You got USF and Eastern Washington sandwiched in there. I'm not even going to worry about those games. But Kentucky at Tennessee, Missouri, those are the games where if Napier runs out to a 3-0 start in the SEC next season, then you go into LSU, Georgia, Texas A&M. But if we struggle in those with the Kentucky, the Tennessee, the Missouri, those are the ones, if we put those behind us immediately, I think that could lead to a pretty strong start for Napier. If we come out and we struggle in game 2 against Kentucky, we could be in for another long year. Will, what do you think about immediate expectations?
I mean, I think the immediate expectations are that the best players are playing, right? So irrespective of whether that means guys transfer, irrespective of whether that means that you got a little bit of a skeleton crew in various areas, I think the best guys need to play. So Anthony Richardson, I don't think there's any doubt now that we've seen the whole season in totality that Florida probably wins more games if Anthony Richardson plays this year. If nothing else, Anthony Richardson will be more ready for 2022 had he played a lot more snaps this year. And I think in a large part, that's one of the reasons why Dan Mullen isn't here anymore, is that he played up Anthony Richardson all through spring and fall practice. And then Richardson comes out and is just unbelievable in those first 2 games. And then they're like, I mean, granted, he had a hamstring injury. He has been injury prone, but there wasn't really an impetus to get him out there on the field, even in bigger packages once he came back. And that's part of it. DeMarcus Bowman didn't even really sniff the field. Lorenzo Lingard didn't even really sniff the field. So these guys having to work their way through a seniority channel to get onto the field when we know, because we've seen in high school, I mean, running backs do not need 3 years of seasoning to be instant impact guys. Quarterbacks, I think you can actually make an argument that they need time on the bench to learn about the system and learn about the program, especially if they're raw. Running backs, you just put them out there and say, hit the hole. Right. And at the end of the day, you should be able to get special level play out of those guys. So that to me would be the thing is, if you lose to those lower tier teams, I don't think it's great. I sort of talk about, one of the issues that I guess it was sort of what I was talking about with Mullen and Vision is that, you make deposits. And every time you go and you speak to a Gator club and you take time out of your day to go speak to one of those Gator clubs, you make a deposit. And then when things go wrong, you have to take a withdrawal. And if you've made enough deposits along the way, then you're allowed to take a withdrawal or 2 and nobody's mad at you and nobody looks at you and says, well, what's going on? The issue is that, if all you're doing is taking withdrawals and you're never putting in the deposits, then that's a problem. So if Anthony Richardson goes out and improves throughout the 2022 season, or let's say Carlos Del Rio comes in and starts out and he's not real good, but he wins the job. He comes out and he improves throughout the 2022 season. Then I think you're making deposits as he improves throughout the season. And those deposits are the improvement, but you do have to make some early withdrawals, right? When you sort of take those hits early on in the year, and you can't just discount those. So, I think they're going to be competitive against Utah, though Utah obviously a pretty good team. I don't think they're going to have a lot of problem against some of those lower tier teams. I think Napier should be able to get these guys motivated to play against these teams that they struggled against in 2021. I can't imagine there's going to be a guy on the roster who's not embarrassed at the performance they put on the field against South Carolina and who doesn't want to get back at Missouri after losing in overtime and having Drinkwitz break out the lightsaber. And so
we did say the same thing about losing to half of an LSU team this year.
Yeah, well,
you got to be a little careful with that logic. Yeah, that's true.
Different coaching staff, man. And that is, again, this goes back to having the best guys on the field is accountability. And when someone has a false start on the offensive line, I think you're going to sit for a series, right? When someone fumbles, might not give you the ball anymore. When a quarterback throws an interception, maybe we'll see what the other guy can do. You don't want to be constantly doing that, right? Your decision-making process should be based on who's been best in practice. But if it's close and somebody's making mistakes on the field, it's time to make sure somebody else comes in. So if we see accountability, if we see improvement, those are deposits for 2022. I don't think Napier has to win every game in 2022 for Gator fans to be on board. I think what he has to do is show progress, show improvement, show that the vision that he's putting in place is being bought into by his players. And that's all you can ask. So whether it's an 8-4 season or whether it's a 10-2 season, I think it'll be fun because one of the things we'll get to do is see those, whether he has really fixed some of the system issues that even Strickland alluded to in his announcement that Mullen was being relieved of his duties. He talked about the results on the field being a symptom of issues within the program. And I think some of the things that we've seen on the field have been symptoms of larger issues within the program. And so if those symptoms go away, then it's an indication that Napier and his staff are doing a good job of addressing some of those things that Strickland was talking about.
Well, last note on the schedule here, one quirk, and this is kind of thanks to COVID, because the Florida State game is a little bit out of whack now. It's in reversed years now. We have 6 home games, 6 of our 7 games to open the season, from 6 home games before October 15th, by October 15th. So 6 of the first 7 at home for Napier. He will be within friendly confines, but you got that bye week, you go to Georgia, and then one more home game the rest of the season. November 12th at home against South Carolina. So you do go on the road to A&M in November and Florida State. So that'll be a tricky second half of the schedule, but certainly it seems like a decent opportunity to start off quickly. Let's shift this thing over to $1, and we'll wrap up with a quick look at Florida's big win over the supposedly surging Florida State. Typical Florida State fashion early on. Saw plenty of trash talk throughout the day. Before the game, both teams had a confrontation along the sideline. Extra pushing, extra shoving. I think we saw a punch in there at some point during the game. Even though both schools were wrapping up disappointing seasons, I liked where the intensity was overall. So this was, you talked about that South Carolina game, Will. Biggest disappointment there, you just didn't go out and compete. You know, at the end of the day, we do get caught up with wins and losses. This is the Florida Gators football program. Wins and losses definitely matter, but there shouldn't be any questions of whether or not the team's competing hard. And you saw this team compete hard against FSU. Now, was there much in the way of consistency or great football? Nope. But like I said, the intensity level, if you're looking to find something, the intensity level was there. And I can appreciate this Gators team rallying, fighting down the stretch here behind an interim coach to get the job done against a rival that we missed out on beating in 2020. So offensively, Will, Emory Jones, 16 of 24, 163 yards, 1 touchdown, 3 interceptions, starts the game out fast. A nice little touchdown down the sideline there to, I believe, Gamble. But 3 interceptions. I think I texted you after the 3rd interception, Will, and I think I said, how many does he get a throw before we get a C, Anthony Richardson? 3 straight to end the first half. Jones comes out the second half in the first series, but he's quickly replaced by AR-15, and he quickly leads the team down. To get the first scoring drive. I believe they got a field goal there for their first scoring drive since the beginning of the game. Richardson, clear-cut, better QB, in my opinion. I did like the commitment after the game, saying I'm still a Gator. Definitely welcome news for Gator Nation. Dameon Pierce, shades of Earl Everett on that touchdown run, losing the helmet, running through it. The man scored a TD. The helmet's flying off. He's flexing and everything. And then he gets a flag on. I think the penalty was for being too awesome. I'm pretty sure that was awesome. Great pictures off that too. Good video. Defense shows up after another decent performance against Missouri. They put on another decent performance on the field. It wasn't a great finish to the game, but if you look at it, the only effective weapon all day for the Seminoles, Will, was Jordan Travis from Florida State, the quarterback. He accounted for 304 of the Noles' 348 yards of total offense.
Yeah, I mean, you could tell why both these teams were 5 and 6. I mean, that was pretty obvious throughout the game. The first thing I would say is that it was really awesome to see Kamar Gamble catch that touchdown down the sideline. This is the first game his mom's been able to go to, and she and I have gone back and forth a little bit. Behind the scenes, she's recovering from COVID. And so this is the first game she's been able to attend on senior day, able to see that on the first drive. That was really cool, right? It's cool to see that, for somebody last game in the Swamp, be able to put a touchdown up and with his mom there for first time. That was really cool. But the actual game, I mean, Emory Jones threw that first interception and then it just went downhill from there. They were actually trying to take a shot on a flea flicker. The pressure got into his face and then he just sort of threw it up and turned into an interception. From there, things just sort of cascaded downhill. And this sort of, I think, goes to the 15, the AR-15, changing his number to 15 type of attitude, right? Is that, Richardson comes out there, didn't put up fantastic numbers, though. If you take away his kneels at the end of the game, like he lost 4, 4, and 7 on the 3 kneels at the end of the game. If you look at it, he was like 8 for 52 in terms of rushing yards in the game. And then he was, I think, like 5 of 7 for 55 yards. very solid, but no fumbles, no interceptions. And when he was on the field in that third quarter, they put up 17 points. And then the very beginning of the fourth quarter, they put up 17 points. And then they just sort of packed it in and said, we don't think Florida State's going to be able to come back. They had the 4th and 1 that he got that they didn't call that he got. And even on the replay, they didn't change the spot because I don't know. And I think the game's 24-14 if he converts that, and no one's talking about a comeback or the whiff at Griff or any of that stuff. But it's
such a great name for that.
it is appropriate that the game between these two teams played in this fashion would end on a just flubbed onside kick at the end. Though I do find it amusing that Florida's special teams were not the ones who screwed up when it came to this one. But look,
Knox had that special teams unit focused.
Look, man, if I was Florida State, I'd be really worried. Because what I'm seeing from Mike Norvell is a guy who's going to cap out in the Dan Mullen recruiting range. And what I'm seeing from Mike Norvell is a guy who can motivate his players, but even when he motivates his players, isn't necessarily going to be able to get a Dan Mullen performance, or at least a Dan Mullen performance out of his first 2 or 3 years there at Florida. He's going to be more like Dan Mullen in 2021 in terms of the performance he's going to get. He's going to have to hit on a big time quarterback, or this program's in a lot of trouble. And you got Billy Napier coming in now, being able to say essentially to anybody who comes in. And again, remember, the bump class is that class where you haven't even gotten out on the field yet, and you're selling your vision for the program. And if you're going after guys who could choose to go to Miami or could choose to go to Florida State, and you go, look at what we're building here. 2 things. I'm going to be here your entire 4 years, right? I have this contract. I'm going to be here for these entire 4 years. Those guys, maybe not so much. And then the other thing is, look at it. They've brought in these recruiting classes in this range. You're not going to win a championship there. You have a chance to win a championship here. And look, Florida even beats Florida State in a down year with Mike Norvell there. Why would you want to go to Florida State? So I think the win does something. And I tend to believe that on-field results don't matter a ton when it comes to recruiting, that it's more of a sales job. But I think it was Bill Sykes who looked at this a couple of years ago. Basically, the winner of the Florida State game has had a higher ranked recruiting class pretty much every year in terms of when they win, right? So if Florida State wins the game, they end up with a higher ranked recruiting class. If Florida wins the game, they end up with a higher ranked recruiting class. And so from the standpoint of getting the in-state talent, when you think about what Napier really needs to do, which is put a circle around Gainesville and make sure nobody leaves with of a certain radius, and make sure nobody leaves from that circle, and then expand that circle as he feels capable. There are going to be some guys who are considering Florida State in that circle. And I just don't know why anyone would choose Florida State at this point, based on what you saw on the field on Saturday and what you could potentially be building there in Gainesville.
Yeah, I was sitting there last Friday morning, woke up kind of, finally post-Thanksgiving, starting to think ahead to the game on Saturday. And I'm like, I'm not nearly excited enough for Florida State game. Like we're sitting here at 5-6 and we're playing for bowl eligibility. Like, what's the motivation here? And I thought through it, and you mentioned the winners getting those higher rated recruiting classes. And I went through and I started reading through some of the watching some of the old games, some of the old highlights and everything. Man, you don't need motivation for Florida State. If you're a Florida Gator, just showing up to play Florida State is enough. And by the time kickoff was around, I was fully fired up, and they had some positive momentum going coming into this game. And the fact that we were able to, with a basically disassembled team at this point, fired coaching staff, just hanging in there, interim staff, fired defensive coordinator, fire head coach, and we go out there and we take away, they came in winning 5 of 7. If they win that game, I think that's viewed as a salvaged success for Mike Norvell in year 2, because they started horribly and they lost to an FCS team. And I want to stress that they didn't they didn't have a bad first half against an FCS team. They lost. So instead of going into bowl season at 6-6 with a bowl game while the Gators are sitting at home with some momentum, you send Florida State back to Tallahassee. No bowl for you, Seminoles. Mike Norvell, have fun explaining another 5-7 season here. I think this was a big win for Florida to really cut into that momentum. Now you get to hand Billy Napier a clean slate here with 3 straight wins over Florida State. And by the way, Miami not looking so hot either. So the opportunity that people can lament about Dan Mullen maybe missing his shot to really put the clamps down in state while Florida State's down, while Miami's down. Billy Napier will very likely have that same opportunity, Will.
Yeah, man. I hope he goes after Sam McCall. So McCall was a Gator commit who decided to flip to Florida State when Torian Gray was let go last year. He clearly didn't feel like the staff had communicated, and I think he might even be related to Torian Gray. So didn't have real warm and fuzzy feelings about the Florida staff, which seems to be a theme for different recruits from the last staff. Billy Napier's a brand new animal, right? You sit there and you come in and you talk to Sam McCall and say, look, we weren't there as part of that, but you saw what we were building here with that staff. We're going to build something even better here. Look at what happened in this Florida State game. You want to take another look? And whether or not McCall flips or not, the question I'm going to be interested in seeing is, does he take a second look? And if he takes a second look, then that tells you something about this staff. It's willingness to reach out to guys who are committed at Florida State to get dirty when it comes to, hey, I know he's committed at Florida State, but we're not going to have any gentleman's agreement about not going after this guy. He's in the state. He's in Lakeland. That's in our circle, right? We build a circle around Gainesville. Lakeland's there. We're going to build a relationship with McCall. We're going to build a relationship with McCall's high school coach. And the high schools in Lakeland are going to know who we are and know that we're going to deal on the up and up and that we're going to be honest with your recruits and all that sort of stuff along the way. McCall is a way to build that. And man, would it be awesome to flip him from Florida State at this point if you had the opportunity. So, we'll see. I think, Napier's got a lot of work cut out for him. He's going to have a lot of things he needs to do right off the bat, but Sam McCall will be getting a call from me if I was Billy Napier coming in, especially after that win over Florida State.
Well, you better call him because the regular season's over, so that means it's recruiting season, baby. Dan Mullen would say it's recruiting season now, so let's get after it. Bowl games, Will. I saw Gasparilla Bowl as a projection, maybe UCF, maybe Miami as the opponent. They're trying to get a all Florida matchup. You seen any other bowl games that we're linked to?
I mean, I saw, what was it? The Duke's Mayo Bowl in Charlotte was something that might've been mentioned. That'd be awesome because Charlotte to Philly has a lot of direct flights and I'd probably be able to swing it, especially if they wound up playing Virginia Tech there. But no, I think the Gasparilla is what most people are hearing. And, it'll be fun to play a team like Miami. Again, sort of the same thing that you talk about with Florida State, that you talk about with Miami, though there isn't I don't think a top 20 or 25 guy who's committed to Miami who had interest in Florida along the way, as opposed to Florida State, where McCall certainly had interest in Florida at some point along the way. UCF, I guess it's interesting, but that sort of has that's just too little too late at this point. There's no upside for Florida to play that game. But at the same time, I'm not sure there's an upside for any of these games other than it means the players are on campus. As Billy Napier gets to campus, he's going to have the ability to come out to practice, to talk to these guys, to build relationships, and to do all that stuff instead of these guys just sort of being spread out and being in their off-season program. During these bowl practices, there's going to be an opportunity, I'm sure, for him to cast his vision with the guys who are there and with the guys he might want to try to keep there. And so without that opportunity, a lot of these guys would already probably be declaring for the draft. I'm sure there are guys like Jacob Copeland who are going to take a look and see what the NFL says about their prospects. And, Copeland's going to have options, right? Whether it's going to the pros or whether it's transferring to a different program where he feels like he's going to be used in a way that he wasn't used this year. But he's also had really good chemistry with Anthony Richardson. So can Napier come in and convince Copeland that it's worth coming back and that they're going to have an explosive offense that features Richardson and Copeland as the number one connection? We'll see, but he'll have that opportunity because of these bowl practices. So, I'm excited anytime Florida gets to play. Pretty much the day New Year's is over is like the most depressing day in the calendar for anybody who loves college football. It might even be more depressing this year, depending upon how far Georgia goes. And so, so anything that keeps one more Florida game on the schedule is something I'll enjoy because, I've said this repeatedly through the year as things are starting to go south. You only get 12 or 13 of these things.
Yep.
And, the value in these games is not just the program, though obviously we want it to be successful. It's the relationships that you build and the people that you watch it with. And so, some random December day in 2021, if Florida State had won this past week, I wouldn't be texting my brother. I wouldn't be texting my dad, right? But those sorts of text messages will go out because this game's being played, even if it doesn't mean anything for the players, and even if it doesn't mean anything for the overall health of the program. It means something to me because of what the program means to me. And so that's, I think, in many cases, the same for other people as well, and why these bowl games take on significance, even if they're not necessarily some giant thing that's going to help build to the future.
Hey, I shared this story with you too when we got together this week. You talking about your brother and your dad. Beginning of the year, first game of the year, my brother took my 4-year-old nephew to his first ever Gator game. And so while this season feels like, 6-6, not super fired, there's a lot of negatives you could have said about the season. You got a 4-year-old kid who now is fully in love with Florida Gator football, was so fired up to go sit through that Stanford game, even though he doesn't have a total idea of what he's watching, but just enjoying being in the stadium, being around the environment, high-fiving all the guys at the Gator Walk and everything. Florida Gator fan for life now. 2021 created that. So there's never a wasted season to your,
and he'll be at the Gasparilla Bowl. So
I hope so. I'm going to try to line that up if that happens, because I'd like to go watch a game with him. Last week on Friday, he was asking my brother, what time do the Gators play tomorrow? What time do they play? And my brother's like, oh, yeah, they're at the 12 o'clock kickoff. And he's like, well, we got to get home by then. He's talking about driving to Tampa for Orlando. This is a 4-year-old making these demands so he can watch a Florida game. He wants to be home by kickoff. So
it's a disease, but it's a fun disease, my friend. Yeah. And it's exciting to have hope again, because that's one of the things that, I talked about Napier needing to cast a vision, but we had lost the vision for Dan Mullen too. And so by the time that South Carolina game, you were the biggest homer ever earlier in the year. And I think rightly so, right? That there was always the possibility that Mullen was going to be able to get this stuff done. And this season just sort of proved that probably wasn't going to happen, and meant that a change needed to be made. And once that hope goes away, that's when things start to look dark. And so the arrival of Napier means that hope is back again. And with that hope being back again, that absolutely means that this bowl game means something to people who use Florida football as a means of building relationships and hanging out with each other, because at the end of the day, there's now hope for the future. And we'll get to talk about that hope for the future as we're watching this game, even if it's frustrating and even if the inconsistencies are still there. It'll be, hey, when those inconsistencies go away, won't this be great? And that sort of hope is really the thing that Napier's bringing. We'll see. 2 years from now, we might be back in the no hope zone, but it's really, really nice to be out of that for at least this current time.
Well, on next week's episode, we might have to give a recap of the UL Lafayette Raging Cajuns Sunbelt Championship game appearance here at 3:30 on Saturday. If y'all want to check that out, they're playing Appalachian State. They did win. They split the share of the title in 2020, but this would be their first outright Sunbelt title under Napier, should they win on Saturday. So get your first look at Billy Napier Saturday if you want to take that, if you haven't had a chance to watch ULL play yet. Will, any final thoughts before we head out?
I just want to thank everybody for being with us this season. We started this show in, I think, May. Mm-hmm. And we're trying to get up to 1,000 subscribers by the time the season started. That certainly started. You all helped us get there. We've put bonus episodes on Patreon. There will be another bonus episode up from this one on Patreon. Had a bunch of people go over there, patreon.com/readandreaction, and support us there. It's just been an awesome season, right? It's been awesome getting to know you a little bit better as we've done this, but getting to know everybody else out there. And as we've branched out into something that's non-writing related for Read and Reaction, it's been great to have all the support and all the encouragement from Gator fans out there who found some value in this particular show. So, we're going to be with you through the off season. It's not ending because the season ends, but with Thanksgiving coming around and with the season ending, this is always sort of one of those times where you take stock. And I'm just so grateful that people let us talk about the program, that they trust us to talk about the program. We put in awful lot of work behind the scenes to try to make sure that we're knowledgeable when we talk about the program, but at the same time, it's not lost on me the trust that people give us and the views that people give us, because at the end of the day, if we were just talking to each other, it wouldn't be near as much fun. So all the participation, all the comments, we do read them. Sometimes it's hard to respond because there's so many of them out there, but thank you. It's been a great season, and just everybody out there supporting us. I can't thank you enough.
Hey, Will said it extremely well. So I'm just going to say I share in all of that gratitude. Very much grateful for the opportunity to be on this platform, sharing it with people watching the show. We've gotten great support throughout the 2021 season, and we will not go anywhere in the offseason. All right. So we will be here week in and week out we'll be scrounging for topics in early March and everything else, man. So I'm very much looking forward, but with the arrival of Billy Napier into Gainesville, we'll have plenty to talk about this offseason, and very much looking forward to the next chapter of Florida Gators football. For Will Miles, I'm Nick Knutson. Thanks for joining Stand Up and Holler. Thank you for watching this episode of Stand Up and Holler. Be sure to subscribe to the Read and Reaction YouTube channel, join our Patreon community at Read and Reaction for bonus content each week, and check out our website at readandreaction.com. I'm Nick Knutson, joined by Will Miles, and as always, go Gators.